for years to build. My $4.7 million Westbridge estate? Gone. Holloway Construction Group, the company I started with my father Harold's old tools and a rusted pickup, 75% hers. But the worst part? When she leaned over and whispered, "You'll never see Mason and Bethany again," and I watched my 14-year-old son and 12-year-old daughter walk out that door, looking back at me like I was some criminal who'd betrayed them. The judge's gavel had barely finished echoing when Veronica turned to me with that smile I once loved. Now, it looked like a predator's grin. She was wearing the diamond necklace I'd given her for our 10th anniversary, and she kept touching it while her lawyer shuffled papers with theatrical satisfaction. "Congratulations, Mrs. Holloway," Preston Whitfield said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The Westbridge estate is officially yours, along with 75% of Holloway Construction Group. My name is Raymond Holloway. 6 months ago, I was living the American dream. I had built a construction empire from nothing, starting as a carpenter's apprentice when I was 18, working until my hands bled, saving every penny. By 42, I owned the largest residential construction company in the state. I had a beautiful wife, 2 amazing kids, and a 7-bedroom mansion that featured an Architecture Digest. Mason, my 14-year-old son, sat in the back row of the courtroom, his jaw clenched exactly the way mine does when I'm trying not to show emotion. Bethany, 12 and usually bubbling with her mother's energy, looked at me with confused eyes. They'd been told I was a criminal, that I'd stolen money, that I'd betrayed our family. The guardian ad litem kept them close, like I might contaminate them with my presence. "The court awards full custody to Mrs. Holloway," Judge Fairweather announced, reading from her notes without looking up. "Mr. Holloway will have supervised visitation pending completion of court-mandated therapy and financial restitution." Veronica stood up, smoothing her designer suit. She'd lost weight during the divorce proceedings, hired a new stylist, looked 10 years younger. The stress that was crushing me had apparently agreed with her. She walked past my table slowly, deliberately, her heels clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that sounded like victory. She leaned down next to my ear, close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same French brand I'd bought her every Christmas. "You'll never see Mason and Bethany again," she whispered, her breath warm against my skin. "I'll make sure they forget you exist. Maybe Derek will adopt them. They already call him Uncle D. Derek, her personal trainer, who she swore was just a friend, until my lawyer found photos of them in Cabo while I was at my mother's funeral. The same Derek who now parked his Porsche in my garage spot. Carl, my court-appointed lawyer, after Veronica drained our accounts, packed his briefcase with the exhaustion of a man who'd fought a battle he knew he couldn't win. "Sometimes the system fails good people, Ray," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. I did what I could." What he could wasn't enough. Not against Veronica's legal team, not against the forensic accountants who somehow found irregularities in books I'd kept clean for 20 years. Not against a judge who seemed to have her mind made up before we ever entered the courtroom. "Mr. Holloway," Judge Fairweather's voice cut through my thoughts, "you have 30 days to vacate any remaining personal items from the Westbridge property. Mrs. Holloway has graciously agreed to have them placed in storage, accessible once you've paid the fees." Graciously. My hands formed fists under the table. I'd built that house with my own company, had laid some of the foundation myself on weekends, teaching Mason how to read blueprints while Bethany played in the dirt that would become her mother's rose garden. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "your assets are frozen pending investigation into the financial discrepancies discovered during these proceedings. You are permitted to withdraw $200 weekly for basic expenses." $200. I'd spent more than that on a single dinner trying to save my marriage 6 months ago, the night Veronica had seemed distant, and I'd thought maybe we just needed to reconnect. She'd ordered the most expensive wine on the menu and spent the entire meal texting someone she claimed was her sister. My mother, Dorothy, had been dying in hospice that week, and I'd stepped away from her bedside to have that dinner, thinking I needed to hold my family together during the hardest time of my life. Dorothy Holloway, who'd raised me in a 3-room apartment in Riverside Heights, who'd worked 2 jobs to keep food on our table after Dad's construction accident, who'd cried when I bought my first truck for the business. "Never forget where you came from, Raymond," she'd told me the last time she was strong enough to speak clearly. "Money comes and goes, but character is forever." The courtroom was emptying now. Veronica's heels echoed down the hallway, joined by the expensive shoes of her legal team. My children were ushered out a different door before I could even try to speak to them. Mason looked back once, and I saw myself at 14 in his eyes. Confused, angry, trying to be strong. I sat in that empty courtroom for another 10 minutes, staring at the American flag behind the judge's bench, wondering how justice had become just another thing money could buy. My phone had 17 missed calls from former employees wondering if they still had jobs, 3 from suppliers wanting to know about pending payments, and 1 from my foreman, Lou, that just said, "I'm sorry, boss." The bailiff finally asked me to leave. "Building's closing, sir," he said, not unkindly. He'd seen this before, men in expensive suits that no longer had homes to go to, wedding rings they still wore out of habit more than hope. I walked out of that courthouse with nothing but my father's old watch and the work boots in my truck, the same boots I'd worn when I poured my first foundation, signed my first contract, built my life brick by brick, only to watch it demolished in a single afternoon. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up back in my mother's apartment, finding a box that would reveal the truth about everything, you need to know how a working man's son built an empire and lost it to a woman who played a longer game than I ever imagined possible. My name is Raymond Holloway, and this is the story of how I lost everything and discovered who I really was, buried beneath the floorboards of the past my mother spent her entire life protecting me from. My story really begins 24 years ago when I was 18 and showed up at Brennan Construction with